the Sword of Laban. I have here with me tonight Jeff Hale. Today we're going to make the bold claim that the wise men that visited the Christ child were part of the ultimate crossover between the Book of Mormon and the Bible, and that they were in fact Book of Mormon characters. Nephi, the son of Helaman, the high priest, Lehi, his brother, and possibly Samuel the Lamanite, who traveled all the way from the New World over to the Old World, where they met Christ, anointed him, and witnessed his birth, and maybe even stayed to tutor him. So we're going to dig into this a little bit. It's one of those things when you first hear about it, you're like, wow, yeah, maybe, no, well, be cool if it was true, right? And then when you dig into it, you hear another piece of evidence, you're like, huh, and another piece of evidence. And the 20th piece of evidence later, you're like, wow, there's a lot of breadcrumbs that point to this. So how did you hear about this, Jeff? And you've been thinking about this for a long time, haven't you?
Well, a couple of years anyway. I don't know. I would say it's a long time, but a few years ago, I was just reading with my regular scripture reading, and the part in Helaman when it says that angels did appear unto men, comma, wise men, and they did, they shared the glad tidings of great joy or whatever it was. And I thought, well, that's pretty cool. It just sounds just like the New Testament. And so I just thought on that for a little bit. And the more I thought on that, I just thought, wow, why did they say wise men there? And why is that just the common? Why not just say they appeared unto men and they appear, and then but to echo the New Testament and to put wise men in there, I thought that's pretty cool. Did Joseph Smith do this on purpose? And I started thinking about it, and then I just went backwards, and I'm like, what's the timeline here? Oh yeah, Nephi disappears. Oh yeah, Nephi was probably 50 or 60 years old. And I just kept on looking and searching. And then I just did all sorts of internet searches, just saying, okay, who else? I can't be the only one who's ever thought about this. And I searched and searched, couldn't find very many things. And finally, after I did a whole lot of other looking at it myself, then I started seeing a few other people saying the same thing, but it wasn't a very popular topic. And I kind of shared it with a couple of family members and friends, and they're like, wow, that is interesting. And then the more I read, every time I read Helaman, the book of Helaman, and a little bit in the end of Alma, and then the third Nephi, I just think, wow, everything really falls into place that makes it so that Nephi might have been the head wise man and brought along his brother and possibly Samuel the Lamanite and maybe a few others, and said, let's go see the Christ child. We can do this. We can do this. We have the ability. Let's go do this. Don't tell the world. We don't need the world to know, but let's go do this. And it just made a lot of sense.
Yeah, absolutely. Kind of a similar experience for me. But there's these breadcrumbs strewn throughout the scriptures. And if I was Joseph Smith and I'd put in some cool things like this and chiasms and other Hebraisms, I would have pointed at these evidences left and right and said, look at all these connections. But yeah. Joseph Smith didn't. And indeed, he didn't even seem to know the Book of Mormon that well. I mean, he quoted from it, but he quoted from the Bible much more. And he really was just the vessel to give us the Book of Mormon, but not the originator of it, right? So here's the scripture that you mentioned in Helaman 16. This is soon after Samuel the Lamanite mysteriously disappears, I believe, if I'm not mistaken. Mm-hmm. And then it says, Samuel the Lamanite, he didn't disappear. He went back to his hometown. And then it says, angels did appear
never to be heard from again. So
yeah, right. Which soon after this, Nephi disappears, never to be heard from again. And he makes special preparation for his journey, right? He hands over the office of high priest and all of the sacred records and relics to his son, Nephi. And Lehi, his brother, who was, it says, not a whit behind Nephi pertaining to righteousness, also is never heard from again. So here's the verse you were quoting. And angels did appear unto men, wise men, and to declare unto them glad tidings of great joy. Thus in this year the scriptures began to be fulfilled.
Powerful verse. Just powerful.
Yeah, it is. Now I hear a few people saying, well, we don't know there were three wise men. This is all supposition and speculation. Yeah, well, we don't know there were just three gifts, of course, but we're going to talk about why there probably were three scripturally and doctrinally. And then in terms of it being supposition, Well, yeah, the competing theory is the prevailing scholarly theory that these were from Persia, or they were like these pagan space wizards from some other country that divined something from the stars and wandered over and paid their homage and wandered back, and then nobody else cared in Persia before or since. Like that just seems odd. Or there's some fifth century manuscripts that give them names and that say they're Persian priests, Zoroastrians. Some say they're Babylonian astrologers, Chinese mystics. There's some 7th century documents that say they came from China. But if anything's supposition, that's supposition, right? There's really nothing else to support it. Where, in contrast, here we have the Book of Mormon, which will go through all the breadcrumbs to support it. We have much more evidence for them being Nephites, or I would say Lehites, because we're including potentially Samuel the Lamanite. And so, and furthermore, if they were Babylonian or Persian, anytime you hear that, it's not very well informed. Well, first of all, there was no Babylon and no Persia at the time of Jesus' birth. By that time, the Babylonians had been conquered by the Persians, who'd been conquered by the Seleucids, who'd been conquered by the Parthians. And so, okay, it might have been someone who pointed back in their lineage, say, I was originally from Babylonia or Persia. But in reality, maybe people are being a little loosey-goosey with the terminology. But the point remains that, like, in the conventional view, it's not very solid. It's pretty shaky. And as we go through the evidence here, I hope you'll come to see that it's even stronger than the conventional view.
Well, I like
So,
also the way that the Bible. If you look at who the Bible dictionary, if you read the Bible dictionary, it says, tries to define who the Magi were and who the wise men of the East were, and it says who these men were. We are not told, but it is certain they were not ordinary men. They were privileged to search out the Son of God and give him gifts, and they were spiritually sensitive and knowledgeable, suggests that they were actually prophets on a divine errand. So, wow, that fits.
right.
And so we don't know who they are, but we know that they knew the prophecies of the star. But prophecies of the star aren't in the Old Testament. So, but you know where they are? They're in the Book of Mormon.
Mm-hmm.
That's the only scriptures we know that were prophesied at the star. So anyway,
right.
a lot more goes on. Keep leading us, David.
Oh, that's great. And in fact, we're going to go into the star more probably in the second part of this series next time. But I like that you brought that up because it also says there under Magi in the Bible dictionary, their knowledge was precise and accurate. It seems like they were representatives of a branch of the Lord's people from somewhere east of Palestine who had come. I'm like, who else in the world had precise and accurate knowledge about a star? In fact, it's a gaping omission and hole in the historical record that nobody else, like even the Chinese who made meticulous records about all things astrological and astronomical, don't have any record from a star at exactly this time. The Persians don't. Well, of course, it's not Persians anymore, it's Parthians, but there's no country on the planet that has any historical record of a star except for Samuel the Lamanite's prophecy. And so that is some precise and accurate knowledge right there.
Yeah, there you go.
Yeah. So you mentioned before that Nephi, this is son of Helaman, and let's take a look at the family tree here. So this is the Book of Mormon timeline. We've got the Lamanites here, the Nephites here, and then the first Lehi and Sam and Nephi. Not coincidental, I think, that we're here talking about another Nephi, another Sam, and another Lehi that potentially made the reverse journey in kind of this symmetrical fashion. But as you go down here, we'll see that, here's Alma the Elder and King Noah, and then he had Alma the Younger, who was the great-grandfather through two Helamans of this Nephi. So this Nephi is the one that, as you recall, he stood on the garden tower and he prophesied that the chief judge was dead, and they ran and found that the chief judge was dead, and then he said, go and find blood on this person's garment and so forth. So he has some pretty cool stories. He also has incredible prophecies and promises from God. He was given the sealing power, which there's only a few times in the scriptures that we actually have recorded that what you bind on earth will be bound in heaven, and loose on earth shall be loosed in heaven. And one of those times is God speaking directly to this Nephi right there. So he had spent his whole time, I calculated that he was probably around 20 years old when he became the chief the high priest, which sounds pretty young, right? A 20-year-old young whippersnapper that's now the high priest over all the land. And it was kind of by necessity because his father had died.
Wasn't he also he was also the chief judge, right?
Yes, the chief judge.
I think he
Sorry.
was the chief judge,
Yes.
and which kind of lines up to me when people can talk about the three wise men also being the three kings. Well, he was kind of the king of the Nephites. I mean, that'd be the easiest way for him to explain kind of who he was if he was trying to explain somebody. Try to explain the chief judge. I was the chief judge. What's that? Yeah, the king.
Right.
So,
of course, in the New Testament, it never says kings. We have the song "We Three Kings," but we do have a tradition, and there's often like nuggets of truth in tradition, right? So, we three kings of Orient. Well, maybe the kings part there was, and certainly I can imagine that these people from a faraway land that come wearing unusual furs and coats and clothes, and they walk into Herod's palace, and they look very exotic, right? And I can imagine that also their ability to like read and write, even if their spoken language had changed some, they were very diligent about keeping their written language the same over time. So their ability to read and write and potentially to speak Hebrew would have marked them as wise men. So I can imagine that they would have been seen as kings and rulers. Yes, absolutely.
Yeah, and the fact that they went to see Herod and Herod received them is kind of says, well, they're somewhat important. Someone knows they're important. I also like that they went to Jerusalem because they, if they were Nephites, if they were people who knew the record, they would be reading that, okay, they came from Jerusalem. They didn't know about Bethlehem. They didn't know about anything else. They know that their fathers came from Jerusalem, so they got to go to Jerusalem. And then from there, let's get the further details on where to go. So go to the king and see if he has any details on where this might be.
Yeah. And that's just beautiful because for years, decades, going on centuries now, Mormons, LDS, have been mocked for their scripture, the Book of Mormon, saying that Christ was born at Jerusalem. And people have been quite happy to tell us that, oh, what a fraud. Like, it's got so many errors. And one of the errors is it says Christ was born at Jerusalem. He wasn't. Like, Joseph Smith didn't know anything. And he was just like spouting this stuff off. Well, it turns out that's evidence for this theory, because if that's all they knew, if they didn't have the Book of Micah, right, which whoever wrote Matthew 2, presumably Matthew, said that was what pointed them to Bethlehem. That's what the Herod's wise men said to them. Anyway, if they didn't have the Book of Micah, they would have just gone straight to Jerusalem and then kind of scratched their heads and thought, well, where is he, right? So then they needed help getting the last few miles to Bethlehem.
Yeah.
So back to this diagram here, we have Nephi and we have the younger brother Lehi. And then around this time, and they're based in Zarahemla, at least Nephi is. At this time, Samuel the Lamanite, he shows up out of nowhere. It's just this really weird kind of vignette where someone from left field, like this Lamanite, like when else does this happen in the Book of Mormon? That you just have a random Lamanite that shows up and starts giving these bullseye prophecies and saying exactly what's going to happen in great detail about a star and the day and the night and the day and other signs and so forth. Like very precise. And this is recorded in great detail. And right after that, it says that many people heard Samuel and went and sought out Nephi, who may have been in the city at that time, actually. And they immediately went and sought him out to get baptized. So, then Samuel kind of disappears. He goes back to his land. But I can imagine Nephi and Lehi, if they didn't already know Samuel, and remember, they're the record keepers, at least Nephi is, he's going to be writing down the story of how Samuel came and prophesied on the wall. And then I can imagine that if he didn't already know Samuel, he would go seek him out and he'd say, what's going on? You've got these bullseye prophecies.
Well, think about it this way too, that because I've kind of pondered that a little bit, and thinking of Nephi didn't write this down because this stuff wasn't included until after Christ came. And after Christ came, he says, hey, remember, I sent you Samuel the Lamanite. And didn't he prophesy of these things? Didn't he tell everybody about these things? And Nephi's like, yeah, I do remember that. How is it that it's not written? You're right. it's not written. Let's write this down. And why was it not written? My guess is probably because it was Nephi, as we see on here, Nephi the second here. Maybe it was his responsibility to write it down, but he's like, I got to go. We're taking him with us. We'll write stuff down, but I'm taking that stuff I'm writing down. I'm taking it with me right now. We're taking Sam. We're taking Samuel Lamont. We're taking Lehi. We're going. And so it's just left with Nephi, the son, who was the one who witnessed Christ's resurrection coming to America, who then says, that's right. We don't have that record. Why don't we? Well, let's write it down. And so crucial and so just consequential that Christ would come and say, you need this scripture in there. That's an important one. We need you guys to have this. Well, I just needed us to know that the Nephites knew of the birth and the star and okay. Yeah. All right. Just a couple. I think we've done fine without it, but it's also great that we have it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Specifically Christ, the risen Christ who visits the Nephites or Lehites, I guess I would say. Specifically, he's got this peculiar interest in telling them to include all of Samuel's prophecy. And there's one that he points out specifically. He says, didn't Samuel prophesy that that people would be resurrected and that would appear unto many, and which has also happened in the old world? And this is just this peculiar story of a Samuel that shows up and then disappears, giving all these bullseye prophecies, and then he shows up in a very peculiar manner again when Christ says, hang on a minute, there's one very important guy I want to make sure that you remember. It kind of would close that loop if Samuel went to Christ in person, right? So maybe let's talk about some of these motivations. And you mentioned before the age of Nephi, so we can calculate that he was probably 20 when he became chief judge. He was probably 60 or 55 to 60 when he disappeared. And presumably he knows that Christ is going to minister for 30 years or so. And so that would place him too old. Like, assuming lifespans back then, he's 60 years old. He's like, I'm not going to live to see him. I've waited so long. And if you read his writings, like the amount to which Nephi is just looking forward to Christ is incredible. He's thought about it for years. He's been preaching and prophesying full time from age 20 to age 60, and maybe even longer. And then he misses Christ by a few years. He knows he's going to miss him because he's going to die. That would just really ruin your day. So I bet he's just like, you know what? He probably thought back to his patriarchal blessing in Helaman 5. It says that before Nephi and Lehi went out preaching and prophesying together, they remembered the words that their father had told them, and where their father said to them, "Remember your names. Remember your names. Remember what they stand for. Remember how does it go? Remember their works, right?" So he's casting
that they were good.
That they were good, right? So Helaman, the father, is telling Nephi and Lehi, remember who you're named after, remember their works. And what were part of their works? Well, it was coming out of the old world into the new world. And he probably called this back to mind. And one other thing was, during this time, also, for a few decades prior, we hear about Hagoth's ships, where this curious man, Hagoth, starts building ships. He starts sending them north. And I calculate that Nephi is maybe about 3 to 5 to 7 or something at this time when some of these big journeys are happening. And so he was kind of on the young end, and Hagoth would have been kind of old if he may have passed away by the time that Nephi was 60 years old and disappeared. But I'm sure that his shipping company, essentially, that he set up, his family shipping business, was still around. So there's the means there.
Well, not only that, but it says there in Helaman, in the first couple of chapters there, it says that we don't even, there's not room to have the record of all the records of their shipping and of their dealings, their works, but it specifically mentions shipping. And we know that the shipping happened, that Hagoth went and, didn't hear from him and a group of people as well. But there was also a group of ships that went to the land northward. Mm-hmm. And they took, and then later it talks about a lot of shipping that would happen between the land of Zarahemla and the land northward. And so if a lot of shipping is going up there, they have these ships, they have the record of the ships. And then later on in Nephi's life, for 6 years, he and Lehi go up to the land northward, and they preach in the land northward until they don't listen to him anymore. And then at least Nephi comes back. It doesn't say if Lehi comes back, but Nephi comes back to the land of Zarahemla. But for 6 years, he's with the people in the land northward. And these people in the land northward were brought there through ships.
Mm-hmm.
And so he's got record of the ships, because it says right here that he had all the records, and it says we can't contain all the information on the shipbuilding that we have, but it's there. And Nephi, who traveled to the land northward and back, and his great uncle also went off with Hagoth into the ships, and so okay, I think he was very familiar with shipbuilding. He knew about it. He knew the people that were all part of it, and then just to think that he's been told, remember all these people, remember. And then he goes and he testifies to the people, and he talks about all the prophets that have testified of the coming of Christ, of Zenos and Zenock, and he goes through all the prophets in one of these chapters here in Helaman, just says all of them, that everybody testifies of the coming of Christ. Yeah. And so do you, Nephi. and if all these people wanted, even Alma, what would that be? His great grandfather or his great grandfather says, "Oh, would to God that the coming of Christ be in my day. Would to God that it be in my day." But whether it happens, all right, no. But Alma wanted to happen in his day. I'm sure he passed on that desire to Helaman, who passed on to Helaman to Nephi, that they wanted. They wanted that. They wanted it to be then. And if you want it, there you go. Alma 13:25, right?
Yeah.
Would to God that it might be in my day, but let it be sooner or later. In it I will rejoice. Yeah. And so if Nephi's been waiting and waiting, how do you stop? I think of it right now. What if they come out in general conference and say, hey, next general conference, we have a special guest. There'll be actually an angel is going to come into the conference center. You think that conference center is going to be about half full that time? And people are, no, they'll be lining up, everyone on, and that's just for an angel. Or if they have something special, they'll do that. But if you know when the Son of God is going to come, the same Son of God that you've prophesied for, the same Son of God you've spoken with, the same Son of God that he's coming to the earth, can I please just, hey, wait, you've promised me any good thing I want, I can have, right? When he gave him his healing power. How about this one good thing? Let me go see the Son of God. Let me see him. Let me administer to him. Let me be a part of this. It just makes sense. You look at Simeon the prophet, or Simeon who was promised before he died in the New Testament that he would be able to see the Son of God. Well, that's just Simeon. Yeah, but then Anna the prophetess in that same group is promised that she would too. And then when the shepherds hear from the angels that the Son of God is born, they're like, well, let's go. And so, yeah, it's not a bad thing to want to see God. We're told to. Even President Nelson told us to go find him in the temple. Go seek out Jesus Christ. You'll find him in the temple. And so I can see Nephi saying, this is important. I need to go find the Christ child.
Yeah. So here's the scripture that you were talking about. This is when he's, I believe it's when he's given the sealing power in Helaman 10. Blessed art thou, Nephi, for those things which thou hast done. For I have beheld how thou hast with unweariness declared the word. Which, side note here, he has already demonstrated his willingness to go and live abroad. He went to the land northward for how many years did you say? 5 years, 6 years? And he lived
6
there.
years,
And he preached presumably away from his family. Maybe he's took his family. But he's willing to just pick up his life and just go somewhere, right? And continuing reading, thou hast not feared them, and hast not sought thine own life, but hast sought my will, and so forth. And he says, because thou hast done this with such unweariness, behold, I will bless thee forever. I will make thee mighty in word and in deed, in faith and in works. Yea, even all things shall be done unto thee according to thy word, for thou shalt not ask that which is contrary to my will. So this is carte blanche.
Yeah.
God saying to Nephi, you get what you want because I know you're going to ask for the right thing. And you've just demonstrated that through the example of Simeon, Anna, the shepherds, wanting to go see Christ is not a bad desire. It's a very good desire. And Nephi is one who's just been told that he will receive anything that his heart desires because they're righteous desires.
And then in Helaman chapter 8, that's where I was saying he's prophesying and talking to the people in Helaman chapter 8 and verses 19 through 23. He just goes through and he's like, Zenos did testify boldly, and for that he was slain. Zenoch testified of Christ. Isaiah, Jeremiah, Lehi, Nephi, almost all our fathers, even down to this time, yea, they have testified of the coming of Christ and have looked forward and have rejoiced in his day, which is to come. That's in verse 22 of 8. So he's quoting all the prophets. Everyone testified of Christ. Everyone testified. We know he's going to come. And now he's like, and it's happening in my day. And I know how to build ships, or I know the people who know how to build ships. Mm-hmm. And I know when he's going to come. He's going to come in 5 years. I know where he's going to be born. Oh, but I'm not allowed to go. I shouldn't go see. No. You have the power. You have the ability. Why not you? Who else?
Yeah.
Of course it will be you. Oh, and even if it's not by shipbuilding, one of the other great things that happened to Nephi when he was prophesying people and teaching them, and they wanted to kill him, well, he was conveyed out of the midst of them and went to another city. Like, wait, by the Spirit it says he was conveyed out of the midst. What does that mean?
Teleportation?
Maybe he didn't have to have a ship at all. Yes.
Could be.
Just the Lord takes him where he needs to go.
Yeah. Yeah, but there's certainly a pattern in things, right? Because when Lehi, Nephi, and Sam and their families, and everyone, Laman and Lemuel, came across the first time, there was a pattern in things. The Lord relied upon them to do a lot of the work. I mean, they had to build the ship, didn't just pop up out of nowhere, and they had to, but he did give them help. He gave them the Liahona, and we can almost see the same kind of pattern in reverse, where probably they had to build a ship. I mean, I get what you're saying. There's many possibilities, but probably they had to build a ship. And
most likely a ship.
Bossman, Chief Judge, he knows everyone. He knows Hagoth or Hagoth's son at this point. They build a ship, but there's also divine help given. In fact, the Liahona is never spoken of again. There's a curious case where I believe it's Alma, the elder, gives it to Alma the younger, or it could be Alma gives it to Helaman. It says, "Hey, my son, I'm giving you these records. I'm giving you," and he goes through the. He also says, "I'm giving you the records of wicked people, basically the secret combinations. Please don't make sure that no one else, don't let it get out. And then I'm giving you these other things." And at the end, before he wraps up his words to his son, he gives a long description of the Liahona. He never says, "I'm giving you the Liahona," but he says, it sounds like the Liahona is part of the bundle. He gives it to his son, presumably, and that gets passed down father to son. Only 2 more generations, or perhaps it's 3, down to Nephi. Nephi has the Liahona. So he's got the means. He's got the knowledge, like you said, this pinpoint knowledge of timing and of location across the whole planet. He knows precisely the city in which it's going to happen, or thereabouts. He knows precisely the timing. He's done the preparation. He's, given his records to his son, and then he disappears. He's got the motivation. He's got the resources, and like, this isn't his first rodeo on ships, right? He's already been traveling on ships. So he kind of, I'm sure he knows sailors and a crew that will get him there. So really interesting.
You said he has the resources all throughout the Book of Helaman. It talks about the incredible wealth that the people were generating. Even the high priests were amazed at the prosperity and the riches that were being accumulated. And so if they had to bring gold with them, I think he would have had access to it, because it was all throughout the land they talked about, with just incredible amount of prosperity and riches that all throughout the Book of Helaman talks about that. And
absolutely.
And then I think it just would he want to be conveyed out of the mist and just take me to it? No, if you look at who he was, when he's constantly preaching to people, the moment he's given the sealing power, what does he do? He turns around, goes back to the people and says, "Okay, let me prophesy now. And let me tell you, if you don't repent, this is going to happen. And there's going to be a famine and pestilence." And he just loves to teach the people. He went to the land northward to teach. He taught a group of Lamanites, and 8,000 of them were converted with his brother. And then he goes back to the Nephite dissenters, and they believed in him. So he's got such great power, and he loves to teach about Jesus Christ. And that's what so I could see him going, "We're going to cross the seas. I believe Hagoth is still alive. we're going to find him. We're going to teach the people where we're going and why we're going there. And anybody we come across along the way, we're telling them about Jesus Christ. So, and that's why when he gets to Herod, what does he say? Where is this guy? Where's where's this guy born? He's not afraid to talk to them about the birth of Jesus Christ, because that's all he's talked about. And so he's going to tell them, yeah, I want to find the Christ child.
Yeah, where is he that's born King of the Jews? And although the Book of Mormon doesn't use the phrase King of the Jews, because, I mean, it's a record about the Jews. There's nobody else mentioned there. There's some people that are alluded to. There's already people in the New World, but it doesn't really talk much about them. So it does, however, his great-grandfather does use the phrase King of the whole world a couple of times. And, I can imagine that being like a common way to refer to him. So when they show up in Herod's court, they're like, where is he that's King of the Jews? And you also talked about gold, how we know there was gold and they had great wealth at the time. And we'll talk about this next time, but there's some interesting theories as to what that gold exactly was. But also on the journey, on the way, they could presumably trade some of this gold for frankincense and myrrh, particularly if they came up the Arabian Peninsula, sort of landed there in either Kuwait or they went up the other strait. So Nephi disappears at the exact right time to make a journey. It's not exactly clear to me. I've kind of tried to figure out exactly when he left. And I've gotten estimates all the way from 1 month before the birth of Christ up to 24 months before the birth of Christ, based upon how you interpret the text. But my best estimate is between 4 and 15 months before the birth of Christ is when Nephi passes on the records to his son, mysteriously disappears, and never comes back. In fact, 11 years later, in 3rd Nephi 2, it says that it mentions again that, oh, by the way, Nephi never came back, and he could be nowhere found in all the land. So they're still puzzled 11 years later as to where this guy went.
Because it was obviously he left somewhere, but left in a way that they're like, yo, he's coming back. I mean, if he would have left with nothing, then they're like, oh, this is really strange. I mean, oh, he must have died. This is what happened. But if he left with all his stuff or left with a whole bunch of stuff, then they're like, okay, well, he's going on another mission. When will he be back? Oh, did anybody? Nope. Nobody knows what. Okay, 11 years have gone by and he hasn't come back, which also means that he was young enough that he could have made that journey. That 11 years later, they're like, he should still come back. Why is he not back? He's, and I'm guessing that's probably, when he's like 70, 75 years old is 11 years later. So yeah, he probably left when he was in his 50s or 60s is what I would guess when he left. Because, yeah, I mean, later on we find out that the age of man, according to what Christ said to the 12 apostles, you could have anything you want. And 9 of them says, we want to come to you right when after we die, we want to come right to your kingdom. And he says, all right, then once you're 72 years old, then that'll happen. So okay, well then that's the age that they expect to be kind of about the life expectancy of a man. So if that's what they're saying about Nephi, that he hasn't come back, it's been 11 years. Well, he's probably younger than 72 when he left. He's probably in his early 60s or late 50s or somewhere in there.
Yeah, and it's also curious the timing that he left, because this is a time when there was a lot of persecution. There's also a lot of converts and baptism, but there's a lot of persecution of the church. This isn't the time when you want to lose your precious leader, right? Especially somebody that you've looked up to for decades now. He's been leading the church as the high priest and chief judge for decades, from age roughly 20 to age roughly 60. And so everyone's looking up to him, and then suddenly he just disappears without saying where he's going. And sure, maybe he died in the wilderness, but I'm not really sure that is a great hypothesis here for what happened to him. It's also kind of curious that he prepared so well before he left and passed everything on as if he knew that he wasn't coming back, I would say. So, and I wonder if he told his son, and his son later becomes one of the 12 apostles that Christ calls when Christ shows up. The resurrected Christ appears, and so it's interesting. There's another touch point there, that if the older Nephi did go and minister to the Christ child, then the risen Christ comes back and ministers to Nephi. So there's sort of a lot of symmetry going on here.
Yeah,
that's quite interesting.
I would also think that because we don't hear from Lehi, his brother, anymore after we find out that Nephi returned from the land northward after 6 years, but it doesn't say if Lehi did. And so maybe Lehi's in the land northward. And so Nephi packs up his stuff, says, I'm going to go find Samuel the Lamanite. I'm going to go find Sam. And we're going to go to the land northward. We're going to pick up Lehi, see what he thinks, and we're going to make this journey. And so he does these things, and it makes sense to him, and he's just following what he wants to do. And but then for everybody else, it's like, well, yeah, he's going to the land northward. Yeah, he's done that before. We recognize what he's doing, or yeah, he's Samuel Ammonite's going with him when there's a connection there, or I don't know, maybe if they didn't see him, and maybe he had to go seek out Samuel first. But a lot of stuff we don't know. We just guess at, and I mean, this whole thing is a guess, but it's man, everything lines up so well for such a guess.
Yeah, for sure. And then we have to ask, maybe we'll go into this more in the next, we should wrap this up, but we'll come back to it next time,
Sure.
is why he might have gone. Is it just because he thought it was cool? Now I don't mean to trivialize it. Of course, this guy had been prophesying of Jesus Christ for decades. He'd committed his whole life to prophesying of Jesus Christ and to bringing people to repentance and so forth. But is it just because he wanted to see him? I think there was more to it than that. In fact, my hypothesis is the same as yours, that it was up to him. He came up with the idea and asked and just was allowed to go. But it could have happened another way, actually. It could have been that he was called, an angel, for instance, appeared to him and said, you've got a mission. Your mission is to travel across the ocean in the reverse journey to the way that your forefathers came and anoint the Christ child. Because, stepping out of the hypothetical story for a minute, nobody knows who anointed Christ, right? He was the anointed one. And of course, people will say, well, he's a god, like he doesn't have to be anointed. Well, he didn't have to get baptized either, but he did. He probably fulfilled all that he needed to do in terms of ordinances, and he followed the law of Moses and so forth. He was probably anointed, and we have no idea who anointed him. But a very good guess is somebody that was from a righteous branch of the church, that had the priesthood power and authority, that was as righteous as Nephi, and that had committed his life to Christ, that he would be called to travel back across the ocean and anoint and set apart Christ for his mission. And of course, Christ would have been a baby, but this isn't unusual. I mean, I think David was anointed to be king at age 10, I believe, and a few other people in the Old Testament were quite young. So it's not out of the question. So yeah, we'll talk more about that next time. I think anointing, witnessing, and their actions when they arrive are very interesting too. And we haven't quite given all the evidence in this, so a few teasers for next time. We're going to leave it there. Anything else you want to say?
No, just well, one thing. All this is fun to talk about and everything, but I think if it leads you more to Christ, then it's something worth talking about. And I think that does it for me, that I get to read this and I just get to put myself in there and like, yeah, my testimony of Jesus Christ increases when I think of the possibility. Even if this didn't happen, that's fine. My testimony is increased because I think, yeah, because I would do that and I would want to do that. I would want to have it. So I enjoy talking about it because it helps me believe more. And so I'm glad to have that.
Right. For me too, it has really helped me to dig into the story more, to try to dig up all the details. If you watch I think I made 7 videos last year about this in a series. If you watch them, I go into excruciating detail on like the math of the age of Helaman and so forth. And I'm not trying to miss the mark here, but it did cause me to really study the scriptures and to really try to understand if this was a possibility and try to pick up all the breadcrumbs. So yeah, for me, it pointed me to Christ as well. And that's a really good point that you point that out. So next time we're going to be talking about the journey. Which way did they go? There's a few possibilities. And the star. There's a lot that has been written about the star over the last 2 millennia, a lot that's been said. I think that we have a very unique ability to know things about the star that most of Christianity doesn't, because we have Samuel the Lamanite's prophecy, of course, but we're also in a time when we can go and we can dial back the clock on astronomical software and we can look around. So there's some hypotheses there that we'll dig into next time. And then we'll talk about when they arrive and what they do. For instance, they fall down at Christ's feet, at the Christ child. They fall down in front of the Christ child, And that's not a very Old Testament thing to do. I mean, the Old Testament does talk about falling down, but it's mostly like falling down to idols, right? So that's not like a very Jewish thing to do. It is a wise man thing to do, and it is a Nephite thing to do as well. We'll look into that. So we're going to be talking more about the roles when they showed up to Christ and what they might have been doing there, and what they might have done afterwards. So tune in next time. So I do have a video. I'm going to put a link in the video description where I go into this in more detail. But for now, this has been Jeff Hale and Sword of Laban. See you next time.